Julie Parker, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. And for the sake of the audience, I'm going to say that Julie and I used to work together at C-SPAN, so we've known each other for a number of years. I've changed, she hasn't, and we welcome her to the Illinois Channel. Because, Julie, you are going to be holding a training event for anyone involved in organizations, primarily, I would think, government, law enforcement, other PIOs. Tell us basically what it is you're doing, and we'll get a little bit into your background.
So Terry, we are hosting a crisis communications training in Orland Park on April 15th. The goal of this training is to get public information officers to a place where they feel comfortable and confident about what information they can share and what information they should not share when a crisis unfolds. We're also having members of leadership join because either A, there is no public information officer wherever this organization is, and the leader, whether it be the police chief, fire chief, the mayor, etc., they're the ones who will be handling the media and talking to the public through the media. And the goal is to make sure that everyone, no matter where you sit on that chain of command, that you feel comfortable and confident that the information that you're putting out is valuable to the public, and also that it comes out in a timely manner. So often when it comes to government agencies, and I think actually beyond government, there are many, many layers of approval required to share public information. And while that is done with the best of intentions, because you want accurate information to go to the public, if a narrative starts without you being the source of the news, then the narrative can go wrong and go sideways, and the information can be inaccurate. So any government organization wants to be out there as early as possible and starting to tell the story, starting to shape that narrative. And as information comes out, as it becomes verified, that information can be shared, whether it be in a news conference or more likely these days on social media, ideally Twitter. And that is a place where journalists live and where people who are interested in news go to find out news. And one of my top recommendations for any government agency is to use Twitter specifically so that when the crisis hits, you have that platform built, you have the followers there, and they know to turn to you for the information that they need.
I want to bring up your website, which is julieparkercommunications.com. And anyone interested in attending this event, they can click on live trainings. It's going to be in Orland Park again on April the 15th. It's an all-day event. And you were just mentioning Twitter, and that was one of the issues that I wanted to bring up with you. When you and I had worked in local television a number of years ago, not together, we separately worked in local television news, the landscape of what is video and the way it's distributed and information has blurred so much, because it used to be just your local TV channel, and that was before the era of YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and all the rest. I presume you're going to get into handling social media because you were just referring to Twitter. Do you find that maybe a lot of people who are now public information officers, what we call PIOs, maybe they have a background working as a newspaper reporter, but that skill set doesn't really come across in an era of social media and video distribution?
Well, I find that so many times public information officers come from a media background, and while biased, because that's how I did it, I strongly believe that if you've had that media experience, you've been a reporter yourself, or you've worked on an assignment desk and you're sending crews out to the news, you have the skill set that makes you well suited to be a PIO. You have that sense of urgency. It's built in. You can't shake it. It's the way you're wired. And you know that you've got to put out accurate information. Things like spelling and punctuation and grammar and the visuals, the images that you decide to share on social media are critically important. And everything you do as a public information officer, you are a representative of that agency. So what you tweet, for example, on your personal Twitter feed, if you're the PIO for such and such fire department and you're tweeting things on your personal Twitter feed, you're still that spokesperson for the department. And one of the things we get into is being aware of your your persona on social media, and the fact that you will be, just like if you worked at Channel 11, you're a representative of that agency and you're a public figure. And that's something to keep in mind.
And I wonder, as we talk about this, what should a public information officer be doing when there is no crisis? I mean, hopefully, you know, we hear just about the shooting in Atlanta. We saw what happened out in Denver. And all of a sudden, I mean, kind of sleepy town, college town Boulder becomes the focus of the nation for this tragedy at a grocery store. And yeah, that falls on you. And you have to have your act together before that happens, which is what I presume you're going to be talking to people about, how to handle that when it comes up. But let me also ask you, what would you say to all those public information officers, whether they're a fire department, police department, or working for the state treasury department? What should they be doing, but when there is no crisis,
right,
in maybe working with the media? What's your advice?
During blue skies times, you know, like the storm hasn't come yet, it's blue skies. And that is the time to be working on your social media platforms and building up those audiences so that when the crisis hits, you have this foundation of people who know to turn to you, who value you and the news that you provide. Because essentially a public information officer is like a reporter about the organization. So ideally, good or bad, whatever's occurring within that organization, the PIO is responsible for helping to shape and to share with the public. Media relations is critically important, and it's not because you're not partners with the media. You can have a good working relationship with the media, but you're not partners. The media's job is to cover government and to cover that fairly. And as a PIO, you should work to establish that relationship with the reporter and videographers, assignment editors, news directors. I mean, depending on the size of the market in which you live, you might have greater access to work with members of the media. And the reason that you develop these relationships is like anything in life. When the crisis hits, if you have this friendship, professional working relationship, and the news breaks, the PIO is going to be receiving phone calls from all over your town or your city or your county. But potentially, if it's national or even international news, the PIO will be bombarded from media organizations around potentially the world. If you've got a working relationship with your local media, the PIO is far more likely to pick up the phone or more likely text back to the reporter who's calling if you've got a good working relationship. When you have a full voicemail, a full inbox, you can't take any more DMs, you will turn, as a PIO, you'll turn to the people who have reported on your organization and reported on you fairly, and you'll turn to them first.
And I wanted to say that when we have this communication, I'm kind of curious. I should say to the audience that after news, Julie, you worked with, I think, the Fairfax County. I think you worked with a number of local police departments in the Washington, D.C. area, did you not? So you bring that internal. You're not an outsider to law enforcement communications.
No. Yeah.
One thing.
It's been a decade, yeah.
Well, and one thing I wanted to ask was, to what extent, when you are the PIO and maybe you join the XYZ police department, how much of it, of what you're going to be talking about, is where you have to also change the internal culture? Because in some departments it might be, we don't want to ever talk to the media, and you have to go in and say, it's important that you do, because they're going to cover the story one way or another. And if you don't talk to them, you're not going to get your narrative out there. It's going to be someone else setting the narrative.
That's exactly right. I worked for the Prince George's County Police Department in Maryland and the Fairfax County Police Department in Northern Virginia for a combined 7 years. And at both agencies, it takes time for people to get to know you. You know, you come in as an outsider. When I went from Channel 7's newsroom to the Prince George's County Police Department, I'm coming in as a reporter. And in 2011, when I first started working at the PGPD, it was fairly unusual to have former reporters who are now spokespersons for police departments. So it takes a while for that culture change to occur. And the way that I have found you can do that quickly is to do things like go to roll calls or in crime meetings, county stat, some people call it crime stat meetings, to get to know the district commanders. If your department is big enough, like the PGPD or Fairfax County, Virginia, you've got multiple districts or areas of jurisdiction within a police department. And there's always a commander who oversees that. If you can start to make inroads with the commanders and explain what you're doing and what you want for the department, over time, people will watch what you do. They'll see how the department gets covered. They'll see how you represent the department as a spokesperson, and they'll watch the department's social media platforms to see, hey, Sergeant so-and-so just got a really great, just got a lot of accolades from the public for their great arrest. We want that sort of attention too, and it's deserved. Finally, because social media exists for law enforcement, it helps to level that playing field. The police department no longer needs to rely on the media to tell their story. The police department can turn to its own social media platforms, tell its story, go straight to the public, but at the same time, also help the media tell the story. So it really is a great place to be right now. And what's more important than ever is that departments allow these spokespersons access. Let them sit at the table with the chiefs of police. Let them be there as these meetings are happening. And yes, let them be a part of any internal affairs meetings that take place with the chief. The PIO works for you. It works for the police department. You're no longer a member of the media. You're not spilling secrets about the department. And it's important that this PIO is considered a trusted member of the department, and let the PIO do their job and let them raise questions and let them say, I think we ought to handle it this way from a public perspective. I think we should perhaps do a news conference because X, Y, and Z, and let them have access to the chiefs.
You know, I'm reminded the very first story I ever had published was in a newspaper when I was in high school. And I wrote along with a police officer. It was a one police officer police department, basically for the local subdivision that I was living in. And the reason I say that is I learned a lot just from writing around. Do you ever reverse the process instead of saying, let's have someone who was a reporter educating the police, as was your job? Do you ever do it the other way and say, maybe let's educate the reporters on what the job is of law enforcement and what they're dealing with, so, you know, we have a bridge kind of going in both directions? I would say, as far as your event coming up, and I can imagine, again, this is julieparkercommunications.com. People can sign up on the live trainings that you're having in Orland Park on April 15. But I would also suggest that maybe some in the journalism community might want to attend, and here and there, maybe I would also say they might want to reach out, go to a police department, go to a fire department, not necessarily do a story, but ask that they kind of get some line of communication open, just so you have the feel for the department inside the building, what people are doing, and have a line of communication, which I think would be good background for reporters as well.
Ride-alongs are so valuable, and whether or not that ride-along is done with the intention of telling a story that night or the next morning, it really is for what you mentioned, that background, getting that understanding and seeing how these officers interact with the public, seeing how the public interacts with the department. You can learn so much from 4 hours in a police cruiser, watching as the police officer or officers go about their business. And whether they're walking the beat or they're driving the beat, it really is eye-opening to see what they do. And it wasn't until I was with my first department for probably maybe 6 months or so that I really was in awe of what they do without anyone from the public ever knowing. It is commonplace for officers to help people who are homeless, to help people who are in need, to help change a tire, to give money to a kid who looks like he needs a meal. I mean, I've seen so many acts of kindness, and I wish I could report on every one of them. It really is, it takes a certain kind of person to be someone who signs up to run towards danger. And I wish that more people could have this inside look on a day-to-day basis about the great work that's being done.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, one of my very earliest memories is as a young child. I was probably about 6 years old, and Officer Jack, I have no idea what his last name was, but he would let us sit in his cruiser and turn on the lights, and occasionally we would just, he'd let us press the button that turned on the siren. But, you know, at an early age, it made me feel that, you know, the police officer is my friend.
Right.
And we hear so much criticism these days, and I think so much of it is misguided. There's always going to be some bad person in some organization. But I think the reality is not to spin things in a false sense of promoting law enforcement, but in the real sense, as you say. I mean, where would we be as a society without our police officers, without our fire department people? We'd be in a world of hurt. The other thing is, to the point you were making, you might be interested to know the Illinois Sheriff's Association has a ride-along program where they invite members of the state legislature to go along because, of course, they pass laws regulating, and it's important for all of us just to have a real sense of what's going on. You're going to be dealing with these issues in a day-long training program. I'm sure there's so many topics. We don't have the time right now to go into them, other we'd be spending all day long ourselves. But I think this is important from my own background, as I say, both as a reporter and just someone who's covered police events. And we appreciate you joining us on the Illinois Channel. Julie, if there's anything you want to say in closing about people looking to join, go ahead.
Terry, thank you so much. And I think it's important to say that really anyone who works for a government agency, whether it's a school system, public health, we've gotten to know our public health, public information officers, haven't we? Fire, Office of Emergency Management. There are so many people who are responsible for sharing news about an organization, and we use multiple real life examples and provide guidance on perhaps, this was a tweet. Perhaps this could have been more effective if you had done it this way. And I think the most exciting part of the training is we do mock news conferences, and we give people a critical scenario. We have them work through what they would do on social media. We have them write news releases. And then the fun part, we have them stand up to the microphone, and I get to play the role of reporter again and really ask the hard questions that will be asked of them. And what people say every single time is, one, it's the scariest part of the training, but two, it is the most effective, the most valuable part of the training, and it's the most fun. So who knows, a whole range of emotions, but we get to it all. And I hope to see some of you in Orland Park, Illinois on April 15th.
And I would add that I often say to people, 90% of learning is emotion. You have to, it's one thing to talk about doing push-ups, it's something else to do push-ups. So to give people that training, as you just suggested, with a mock news conference, I think is very valuable, because that's exactly the kind of thing they need to have before they go into it and then fumble the ball in front of the cameras. So Julie Parker, so good to see you again, and we'll look forward to welcoming you to Illinois on April 15th. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, please leave us a comment. Thank you for watching.